Hello and welcome from the campus of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Welcome to today's SCI webcast, Software Acquisition Go Bag, Cracking the CNS Code. My name is Matthew Bukovic. I'm the Technical Director for Cyber Risk and Resilience here at the Software Engineering Institute. And we'd like to thank you for attending. We want to make this webcast as interactive as we can today, so please do ask questions. You can submit those in the YouTube chat area, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel of speakers today. We have a really great lineup of experts. Let me first begin with Principal Engineer Bridget O'Hearn. Bridget brings 30 years of software experience to bear on the challenges the Department of War has in software acquisition. As the DoW Software Modernization Policy Lead for the SCI, Bridget influences the Department of War's software modernization strategy and implementation, software workforce initiatives, software and supply chain, and cyber policy. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you, Matt.
Also joined by Software Acquisition Innovation Specialist, Christina Ryland. Christina helps drive the modernization of software acquisition practices across the Department of War. She has over 25 years of experience, including roles at the SCI, MITRE, Fearless, and as a Department of War civilian. Her expertise spans agile acquisition, digital transformation, program management, and IT modernization. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks so much, Matt.
And then also joining us, a very accomplished member of staff, Julie Cohen. Julie is a senior member of the technical staff and an electrical engineer. She has over 20 years of experience here at the SCI, where she supports multiple programs, including the E7 project and 3 internally funded line research projects. So we have an amazing panel of experts today for the discussion. And welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
So we should just get down to it. We have a lot to cover and not that much time. So I'm going to ask Bridget to introduce us for the first topic. And there we go. The slide clicker is caught up. So over to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Matt. I am really excited to have the team behind the Software Acquisition Go Bag here today presenting. And we're going to be talking about one of our new tactical guides and supplements that recently came out. The tactical guide is called Cracking the CNS Code. And so I wanted to start with a quick background on the software acquisition pathway. So the CNS is something that is required by the software acquisition pathway. We'll talk about that again more in a few minutes. But the software acquisition pathway, for those who don't maybe haven't joined us before, is the Department of War policy that is documented in DoD Instruction 5000.87. It came out in 2020, so it's been around just a little over 5 years. And the objective of the software acquisition pathway is to facilitate rapid and iterative delivery of software capability to the user. It was intentionally designed to remove traditional defense acquisition constraints. So prior to 2020, acquisition was really built for hardware-centric systems. Some of you who have been around the DoW for a while may remember the horse blanket. That was something that we all learned. That was the kind of acquisition we did. That is not the way the software acquisition pathway works or was intended to work. It requires use of proven commercial software development practices like Agile and DevSecOps, and then requires continuous user engagement with developers and acquirers. So if you want a little bit more information about the software acquisition pathway, we have a supplement that's part of our Go Bag. It is called What is the Software Acquisition Pathway? At the end of this presentation, we'll make sure to give you links and a QR code where you can download that. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Christina. She's going to talk about the roles that are within the tactical guide that we're talking about today. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Bridget. All right, so when it comes to the CNS, the roles associated with that are if you're a sponsor, a user, or a team member of the program management office, this whole conversation is for you, right? As we go in further into this conversation, we will break down each of those roles just a little bit more. But one very important and common theme that I hope that everyone picks up on today is that collaboration across all 3 of those roles, the PMO, the sponsor, and the user, are required in order for this to be successful and value-driven. All right, over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. A question then for you. So thinking about those 3 roles, maybe any tips for the audience regarding how best to integrate the viewpoints and the needs of those three disparate roles when you're working as one cohesive project team?
And Matt, is that question for me? Just so
It is. My apologies for not
yes,
being
no, that
more
is
explicit.
okay. We are actually going to dive into that a little bit deeper when we go into each of the individual roles. And so if we can table that discussion until we get there, I think we're going to answer all of those questions in just a few slides.
Wonderful. Sorry to anticipate a future slide, but I think that
That
our
is
audience very
okay.
much wants to know, and they want to see themselves in one of those roles. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, next over to Julie, please.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics of what exactly is a CNS. So it is the first artifact that you need to actually enter the software pathway. This is, you need a draft CNS to start, to get into the planning phase. And that's really the only document you have to get into the planning phase. It documents the high level capabilities of the software. And high level is something that you're going to hear over and over again during this presentation, because that really is what it's meant to be. So that's one important thing. Another important thing is that it really needs to be a living document. It needs to be updated, usually after each value assessment, which is at least once a year. How do you start to get input for the CNS? Well, you can have input from the PMO, certainly. You absolutely need user input. That's very important. Your sponsor will have inputs as well. You can use other documents that have been done, like a ConOps or an analysis of alternatives or a concept of employment or some sort of a capabilities-based assessment. Your acquisition decision authority has to sign the CNS, and they will issue then the acquisition memorandum to start on the software pathway. But those are the basics of what goes into a CNS. Now, you may have heard of a software ICD. If you know anything about the software pathway, it had something that talked about a software ICD for programs with joint equities. And the current software policy calls for using the software ICD. The policy is in the process of being updated, but the January 2026 update to the JSID's documentation no longer includes oversight of the joint requirements, and there is no longer a requirement for the software ICD. So that makes things a little bit easier. If your program is currently using a software ICD, then discuss the timeline for transitioning to a CNS with your decision authority. You'll notice this says discuss the timeline with your decision authority. That's another thing about the software pathway, is that you have a lot of leeway along with your decision authority on exactly what you want to do when. And so do you have to, transition right today because it's no longer there? No. Do what's best for your program. Talk to your decision authority. So why should I care? Why do I care about the CNS, and why are we telling you that it's something that's important? So the first thing I'll say is, if you're confused about what should go in your CNS, you are not alone. We always get asked, do you have a sample CNS that we could use? And we almost always say no, because the idea is your CNS should be for your program. The right level of detail for one program may not be the right level of detail for your program. What one program puts in a CNS may be good for them. It may not be good for you. So looking at sample CNSs oftentimes will not actually provide much benefit for a program. But getting it right has a lot of benefit. One of the main things is that it needs to provide a trade space where people can develop novel solutions, that it needs to be a high enough level where the lower level details can be worked out and people can be innovative. As you're developing your CNS, it really does need to be joint between the sponsor, the users, and the PMO. Now, I will say sometimes there is not a PMO yet. So if this is before it's been named an official program and there is no PMO, then the sponsor will develop the draft CNS, and hopefully the sponsor has worked with the users. But in any case, once the PMO is brought into the picture, then the PMO, the users, and the sponsor should work together collaboratively to develop the final CNS, well, to develop the non-draft CNS, and then do those updates as needed. Really, that starting that communication between those three groups is vital to the long-term success of the program. All right, and now what happens if you get it wrong? Well, prioritizing what you should develop first and having things in the backlog will be more difficult because some capability items are at high level, some are at lower level. That can also make it more difficult to create a cost estimate because of this mix of high level and low level requirements. If you lock in the lower level requirements too soon, then it's hard for the users to update things as needs arise. We all know that in the traditional development environment that Bridget talked about with the horse blanket, changing the requirements was discouraged. And it was usually a really difficult process. Things like engineering change proposals and rough order magnitude cost estimates and a configuration change board and integrated master schedule changes. And nobody liked doing an engineering change in the old system. The whole idea behind the software pathway is that it should be easy. When the needs change, when the threats change, when the users develop a new need, or what they thought was a capability they wanted turns out to not be exactly the right capability, that you should be able to change that and you should be able to adapt. So if you have a high level CNS, it makes it much easier to adapt to changes.
Thanks, Julie. Just a couple of questions for you about that. So one is from me, and there's some questions from the audience. So in your bio, I explained that you're an engineer, an electrical engineer, and a software engineer. So certainly there's an engineering mindset applied to the CNS. And then it seems to me that the CNS is also a governance document. So thoughts about how much the technical nature of the project should inform or color the nature of the CNS itself. Is it sort of standard across all types of projects, or does it vary based on the technical content of the project?
So I think it will vary based on the technical content. And that's why, again, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times is what I think about when I think about the software pathway, right? It's the best of times because you're allowed to make it work for your project. It's the worst of times because you have to think about what's best for your project. There is no roadmap to follow. There is no horse blanket. You have to do the thinking. You and the PMO and your staff and the users and the sponsor, everybody needs to think about what's best for your program. So if you have some technical things, then those capabilities, those technical needs, if there's something that is absolutely needed, should be in the CNS. But if you can, but the more you can leave it at a higher level, and we'll go through an example later on today, the more you can leave it at a higher level, the better off you are.
Great. Thanks, Julie. So our audience has done some thinking. There's a few questions. So let me ask. A question is, the term capabilities appears to refer to functions, what the software does, with non-functional only tied to capabilities, never global, excluding interoperability. Is that correct?
So no. So yes, you read it. You read it correctly, but that is not exactly what we meant.
Okay.
So typically, your users will provide those functional capabilities, but the program office should also add in those non-functional capabilities. Things like cybersecurity, things like interoperability, those types of things need to be in the CNS as well.
Thanks, Julie.
So yes, they should all be in there.
Okay, excellent. So let me, there's another question here. It's related in my mind. It says one of the example requirements in the guide refers to another document, a ConOps. Are there any potential hazards in referring to another document, e.g., it may not be written with the CNS in mind or as intended?
So the idea is to look at those documents. You don't need to refer to them in the CNS, But if there are things in the ConOps that point to a specific capability that's needed, or how that capability fits into the bigger picture, then you can certainly use that. You don't necessarily have to start with a blank sheet of paper to develop your CNS. That's the idea behind referencing those other documents. I'll go back to that. I'll go back to that slide and just point it out again. Whoops, there we go. You don't have to reference any of these. If you want to start with a white piece of paper and just have the things on the left-hand side, you can certainly do that. But if you have these documents, if somebody has done a ConOps or an AOA or capabilities-based assessment, and you have those documents, you certainly could look at those and see what they have to say to start to figure out what types of capabilities should be in your CNS. That's all that was meant to say, not that you have to reference them, or that you if you think that everything in the ConOps is not particularly well stated in terms of capabilities that you need in the system, then you don't have to reference the ConOps at all.
Thanks, Julie. I think it helps to clarify the sources and the inputs that we're looking for with the CNS. And it sounds like you have a great deal of flexibility. That's the takeaway so far, in my mind, regarding the CNS.
Absolutely. And the software pathway as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, over to Bridget to discuss strategies and approaches to be used to create the CNS.
All right. Thanks, Matt. So, as Julie mentioned, there's a lot of ways you can get started. Once you do get started, what are some things that either the sponsor or the program office should consider as they're getting started to create the CNS? So, as Julie mentioned, sometimes it's the program office that is spearheading the development of the CNS. And so if that is the case, those PMO personnel are really going to need to work with the sponsor and the users, right? You want to make sure you have all the right people in the room that understand the requirements, that have a say in it. You want to get their input. Ultimately, the sponsor is the one that signs the CNS. Christina's going to talk about these roles in a minute. So if you have questions about how the user, the sponsor, how those work, Christina will talk about those in a minute. We also have a supplement I'll mention that talks about those roles as well. That's part of the user's guide. So let me just say, if you're the program office and this is your job to spearhead the development, you want to use this opportunity to really have it be a good start to your relationship, right? If you're a brand new program, you want to start that relationship right by being really open to hearing what the requirements are, hearing what the users really need, and having that collaboration early on. Collaboration is key. If you take away nothing else, right? Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. That is the way you can be successful with your requirements. All right, let's go on. So if you're the sponsor, so again, there's different scenarios with the CNS. It could be that there's not a program of record yet. And if that is the case, then the sponsor is the one who is actually beginning to draft the CNS, because there are no PMO folks just yet. So the sponsor is going to be the one who brings those users in. And again, the sponsor and the user are going to do that development of the CNS. Once the PMO is established, which will happen typically after the CNS if it's not a program of record, then that PMO needs to be brought in as soon as possible to start working as the CNS is matured over time. Again, that CNS, that collaboration, the group effort is really what you want with your capability needs statement. So, and Julie mentioned this earlier too, right? High level document. This is not your father's requirements document. This is not N levels of detail where it spells out everything. These are very high level requirements, the capabilities that the warfighter needs and that the software needs to contribute to. Those are key here. And then during the execution phase, the CNS is actually going to be broken down into lower level epics, features, stories by the product team with the help of the PMO and the users. And Julie's actually toward the end going to walk through an example of how that would work. But again, the users need to be involved in those increment planning activities as those capabilities are broken down into those epics, features, and stories. The users need to be there. They need to be involved. All right. So next, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Matt. Any questions from the audience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Bridget. A couple of questions occur to me. So I'm thinking about your description of high level and, not your forebearers' detailed requirements, right? So a couple of things, and again, I must admit, right, I do cyber for a living, so this is not my area of expertise, but one person's high level is another's medium is another's not enough detail. So if there's like too detailed and you're writing haiku on the other end of the spectrum, how do you determine an appropriate level of detail in that high level description?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Matt. So we actually, in the tactical guide, have some examples of here's what a high level requirement looks like, and here's what a detailed level requirement looks like. So we walk through that to give our users some ideas of what, I'm not going to say right and wrong look like, because it really depends for every program, but to give them some ideas of what that might look like. And then again, Julie's going to walk through an example a little bit later to actually show you kind of the level that we're going to want to see in a CNS typically.
Okay, so we do provide some tangible guidance as to what that might look like, or like exemplars.
Yes.
And I can provide a very quick example from when I was actually active duty Air Force. I was in a SPO that was buying new training aircraft, and we were trying to replace the T-37, and there was a requirement for time to climb, among other requirements. And one of the potential bidders came back and said, "We don't understand why you have the time to climb requirement. We can fly all of the training sorties in the time that you've required for those training sorties, but we can't specifically meet your time to climb requirement." And they changed that requirement. They took that requirement out and made it more general. So, that's one where, and this is an example we use in the document, in the tactical guide as well, that if you just made the requirement, you have to be able to complete all the training sorties in the time required. That's the high level requirement. Requiring a specific time to climb and a time to do this maneuver and a time to do that maneuver is a lower level type of requirement.
That's a great insight, Julian. Thank you for sharing that story. So it sounds like focusing on outcome and then kind of working backwards is probably the better way to think about this.
Yep.
Thank you. So I believe now Christina is going to unpack for us the roles, which I tried to anticipate and ask her about earlier, for the CNS and the responsibilities associated with those roles.
Absolutely. So we actually talked a little bit earlier, right? You have the PMO, the program office, the user, and the sponsor. But so let's get started first with the sponsor. You may have also heard this as a requirements owner. This is usually the organization that has the authority and responsibility to advocate for the end user and the mission capabilities. And I'm going to say this on each of the 3 slides. And it is imperative and important that if the requirements are starting with your sponsor or whichever direction it's starting from, that they are being done collaboratively. All right. So now we have, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Now we have the user, right? So the user, excuse me one second, I apologize. The user, all right, those are the people who are executing the mission. They are those that the software solutions actually enable. For this, right, we need them. Their responsibilities really are around the operational concept, the requirements, they participate in prioritizing each of the capabilities. They are also involved in continuous testing. We need them to provide the feedback for the capabilities that are being developed. And again, they are fundamental and foundational to the collaborative group that is necessary in order for the CNS to be successful and value driven. All right, so our last one is the Program Management Office. This one here, we talked a little bit earlier about making sure that your CNS was high level enough. One of the reasons that this is really important is because one of the responsibilities in the program office is ensuring that there is enough flexibility and trade space within the level and depth of that requirement during and throughout the agile software development process, that trade-offs can be made during that process. The PMO is also responsible for ensuring that the logistics, the training, the cybersecurity, and any and all other related certifications are part of and included in the CNS itself. It is also important to note that the program office really needs to ensure that and be part of the process when threats are changing, when warfighter capability needs are evolving and developing, that updates are happening to the CNS as that's going on. This is not a one and done document. This is really about the flexibility we talked about earlier, that space where you can actually create those changes as the warfighter needs and threats are also evolving. All right, over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Christina. A question occurred to me when we're thinking about the role of user and articulating their needs. Any thoughts about when you have third-party relationships, right? So you have a user, then maybe other folks that are supporting the user that need access to that system or that software as well. So thoughts about bringing the voice of related third parties into the requirements as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Others, it's going to be contextually driven by the program, but other stakeholders who might be a layer or two removed from the direct user or warfighter mission, they should also and can also be involved. That would very much be dependent on the context of that program and how you bring them in to take part in the development of the CNS, but also other software pathway documents that there will be future technical guides written on as the user and value assessment as well. So
great, thank you, Christina. Now over to Julie, and we're going to discuss how CNS drives the process in creating the working software. But Julie, I was hoping maybe you could answer a few audience questions before we start that section.
Sure.
So actually there's a comment and then a question. So let's start with the question, right? There is much of a misunderstanding of the granularity of requirements throughout the software industry. I look forward to reading the guide on this. Is there a link? Meaning, is there something that we've created that we could share with this audience member?
So yes, there is a link, and we will share it at the end. But once again, I will say that a lot of this depends on the project. So what may seem granular to one project may be a true capability need at that level for another project. Not quite apples to apples, but the level of specificity in one case, it may actually be a capability need where if it can't do that, then you're not going to use the system. And so we try really hard to say keep them high level, and the guide talks about that and gives examples, but it really does depend on the actual project. But to try and keep asking, what if it can't do that? Is that really a showstopper? Is there any other way that you could get what you needed to be able to use the system? And to keep asking that if things seem too low level is probably the right way to go, to try and get them up a higher level.
Thanks, Julie. And then the other, it's really a comment rather than a question. It's drawing attention to the fact that we provide useful comparisons in the document, so that there's actionable information in the document. So it's great to see feedback like that from someone in the audience.
Yes, thank you. We can't give, hundreds of examples, but we tried to give some examples. But again, the details are where it starts to get hard. And all I can do is say, you need to think, right? I keep saying that about the software pathway. It's the best part and the worst part, but you really do need to think about, along with your users and your sponsor, you really do need to think about what's best for your program.
Well, what I'm hearing, Julie and team, is that, right, one of the through lines is that to do this well really does require critical thinking, right, and putting yourself in the mindset of those various roles we've described to ensure that that this is accessible and usable, which is, I think, one of the key takeaways for me as someone that's relatively new to this topic.
Yep, absolutely.
I agree.
You're absolutely right.
So, Julie, back to the how does the process how does this drive a process rather for creating working software?
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to give a fairly simple example, but hopefully this will start to show you how things can break down. We have a supplement to this tactical guide where we talk about the progression. How do you go from a CNS to something that actually gets implemented by the product teams, right? I think a lot of people have gone through the requirements process where you have all your requirements in some system and then they get broken down into, so you have a requirements document and then you have a subsystem requirements document and the requirements all get allocated and then there's a requirements verification matrix and you work your way down the V and you work your way back up the V. Not quite how it works in agile development or the software pathway. So how do we get from this high level CNS to an actual working product that the users can employ? So agile decomposition can be done in a lot of different ways. Typically what we've seen is something like capability, epic, feature, story, going from the most general to the more specific. Your program may not do that. You may use 3, you may use 5, but this will give you a general idea of how to get from a capability to something that will be implemented like a story. So this is not meant to be read. This is the figure that's actually in the supplement. And now I'm going to walk through an example that you can actually read. So this first page shows the capability to epics, and then the next slide will go all the way down to stories. But I wanted to show a couple of epics. So the capability is we need high G maneuverability. Now, this would be something for a new aircraft, most likely. But the capability, I'm going to use an example to describe how the capability may vary depending on your actual system. So when the F-16s came along, the Air Force realized that the G valve, the anti-G valve that they currently had, wasn't very good at high onset G. So they went to the G valve manufacturer and said, can you make this work better for high onset G? So for that program, the capability might have been improve high onset G capabilities of the high G system. So it might not have been give me high G maneuverability. It might have been more specific, but it was for an existing system. I need you to improve high onset G. So they did that. The people who made the G valve made a high onset G valve, anti-G valve, I guess, really. But the Air Force decided that it was much better logistically to continue to put the same anti-G valve in all their aircraft. And so they put that high onset G valve into the A-10 as well. And if you know what the A-10 does, it does not do high onset G. So again, when I was in the Air Force, we got called because they had grounded the A-10 aircraft for airframe vibration, which was due to the high onset G valve causing fluttering, and then the way it was attached, it felt like airframe vibration. So now the capability might be make the high onset G valve work in a low onset G aircraft, right? So if you were going to write a CNS for that, that would now be the capability you're looking for. And the story has a good ending. The G valve manufacturer figured out how to do that, and we tested it, and we put those on. Again, same G valve, still works on the F-16. Now it also works on the A-10, and there was no airframe vibration. But you can see how the capability is different depending on what you're trying to do. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea. But in this example, so Epic 1 might be to develop a system to help the pilots during high G maneuvers. And a second epic might be to develop the high G flight control system, which now, what's the software for that will help, that will allow the airplane and the pilot to better withstand high G conditions. And there would probably be more epics as well. And now we'll look at going all the way down to stories. So we're following the develop a system to help the pilots during high G maneuvers that we just talked about. A feature might be to provide inputs to the pilot anti-G protection. And then one of the stories might be to limit the maximum pressure in the G suit, right? Pilots don't like to be squeezed too tightly. And then another one, this is another one from my Air Force days, is matching the G suit inflation rate to the aircraft acceleration rate with a lag no greater than 0.1 seconds. So you can see the stories are very, very specific, right? The software to do those things actually needs to do those, right? And if you work your way backwards, where we started out with was that we needed high G maneuverability. So that then provides you, what those stories are.
Thanks, Julie. It's an excellent example of how that decomposition works. So there's a comment and then a question. So first of all, you might want to know, Julie, there's some F-16 enthusiasts in our audience.
All right.
Fans of the lightweight fighter concept. And here's the question. In the supplement, acceptance criteria is only defined for the features and stories. Is this a recommendation? Does this mean with respect to a supplier of what does this mean rather with respect to a supplier verifying the correct implementation?
So you could, if you felt it was needed, you could define acceptance criteria for epics. I would say the capabilities, it would be difficult to define an acceptance criteria for something at that high level. If you need to define it for the epics, you certainly can. But if you believe that your features, when they're all taken together, so if we have, let's just say we have 5 features that feed into an epic. If those 5 features, if you can verify that you meet those 5 features, that you've actually met the epic, and the users can say, yea, verily, if they do these 5 features and can show me they've done them right, then we have met the epic. Then you could do it at the feature level and then the story level, because you want to start at the lowest level. You definitely want to have acceptance criteria. If you feel like you can write acceptance criteria at the capability level, if the users can do that especially, then certainly you can do that. If that's what's needed, if that's helpful, then you can do it.
Thanks, Julie. So Bridget, what's next?
Yeah, great question, Matt. So we have, for those of you who have been around since we launched the Go Bag, we are rounding out the rest of the tactical guides and supplements that are in what we had as our initial blog. There were the 5 essential questions for implementing the software acquisition pathway. So these tactical guides for cracking the CNS code, along with the supplement, that is the second of the 5. So we still have 3 more. That is one that is on metrics. There is one that is on release planning and one that is on the user agreement. So Christina is actually the lead for the one that is on measurement. So Christina, do you want to give our audience just a quick minute or two on what that's going to look like?
Absolutely. So this one's titled Pack Light, Measure Right. And this is really about how does your program track value-driven metrics? And there are 4 supplements that are going to be part of that tactical guide. And that will be measuring and getting value out of the software pathway metrics. measuring beyond the software pathway. So what additional metrics might you need to be tracking for your program? There's another supplement on how to get the most out of your metrics. And then the final one is how your program can get the data that it needs. So how do you get that from vendors and actually pull that into your program? So that is all encompassed within Packlight Measure Right, and we're very excited to get that out to everybody.
Great. Thanks, Christina. I also wanted to mention that in case you're too busy to watch some of our previous webcasts, if you're new to the Go Bag, we actually have some short video clips that are out on our website today. So you can actually go and just watch. They're about 1 or 2 minutes that just give some highlights. So those short clips are out there in our Pack Your Go Bag website. And then just in terms of links, we have our software acquisition Go Bag website, or if you want to go and download the tactical guide and supplement that we talked about today. So the tactical guide is Cracking the CNS Code. The supplement is the one that Julie talked to about how to turn your requirements into your backlog. So both of those are out there. Those are on the second link. If you want to just go straight to Pack Your Go Bag, you can go and download those directly. We really thrive on feedback from you all. We want to know if we're answering your questions, and we appreciate the questions that we've gotten today, but we'd love some feedback. So we've had some really good engagement today. I know I've talked to several product teams from industry that have said, hey, taking the requirements and breaking it down into the backlog is a challenge for us. I hope that we helped with that today. If there are more specific questions, whether it's industry, whether it's a program office, whether it's a sponsor or user, you have more specific questions and you'd like us to address it in maybe another supplement, please send us that feedback. You can click the link to send us a feedback. It just opens like a web form to send us an email. And we'd love that information so that we can continue to provide value. And then lastly, we would love for those of you who haven't yet, please go subscribe to our mailing list. That will get you early notifications. So Christina talked about Packlight Measure Right. If that's something that you're excited about and you're interested in, if you hit that subscribe, you'll get early notice. So as soon as it's published, you'll hear about the registration when we do the next webinar and all of that kind of inside information. Just hit that subscribe. So those are the kinds of ways that you can engage, and we would love for you all to engage with us. All right.
Thanks.
I think, Matt, I think we had a couple more questions. I think we still have a couple more minutes to address those.
We certainly have some time. You have some questions, Bridget, but I want to make sure we emphasize something you've said on the prior slide, which is sincerely, we really do value your input, and it really does shape the things we do. So please do ask questions in this session, but please do follow up with the team. And also, consider using the catalog of artifacts that have been mentioned today, and those will all be linked to this broadcast. But there's a question here, Bridget. Maybe I'll point this at you, but maybe the entire team may have thoughts. If features and stories are the only things that can be explicitly verified, then, at least traditionally, aren't those the only requirements? So thoughts on that, Bridget?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my answer would be no. Julie probably will have something that she wants to add as well. So the intent of the capability need statement, again, is to have your requirements at a very high level to allow some flexibility during implementation. It allows you to make trade-offs as you implement. Just like Julie said, right? If you have a specific part that your program has been mandated to use, and it wasn't built for that, right? I have worked with C-130 programs for many years. Their radar is a radar that was used on a helicopter. This is the C-130J, right? The C-130J has the same radar that's in a helicopter. Well, guess what? It does what it needs to, but the way a C-130 works versus the way a helicopter works are very different things. And so the way the C-130 has to implement that radar and the way they utilize it has to be different. And so saying, hey, you're going to have a radar that allows for terrain following, those are, those are things that you're going to have to make some trade-offs in the C-130 to implement that is different than a helicopter. And so having those high-level requirements allows the trade space. It doesn't mean that the features and stories are the only things that are requirements, because you're going to have non-functional requirements and other things too as you move along, but you've got to be able to trace them back. I will say under the software acquisition pathway, requirements traceability is a little different than what I call old school acquisition, right? Horst Blankwood acquisition, requirements traceability was very different. So Julie, I'm going to let you jump in here.
Sure. So I would say that the part in the brackets, at least traditionally, yes, traditionally, then that would be true. If you're looking at a traditional way of doing things, those are the ones that actually get verified, through testing and having the users, try them out and say, yes, this is what I want. But Bridget's absolutely right. The proof is in the pudding, and if the capabilities are provided that the users want, those get evaluated in a value assessment when they're delivered. And so, when we say explicitly verified, well, they are verified. They're verified by the users using them and saying yes or no, but hopefully yes, you provided me this capability for high G maneuverability, and I'm happy with what you provided, right? The displays work right, the aircraft works right, the G suit works right, the G valve works right. Everything that you provided me works to give me high G maneuverability. And so there is verification at that capability level. It's just done a little bit differently. As Bridget said, it's not the same way that we used to verify all the requirements.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Christina, any other thoughts for us on that topic?
Yes, absolutely. A good way to think about it is that the CNS describes what needs to be done. The features and stories describe how. And so that trade-off decision we've talked about a few times really lives in those features and the stories and the how the program office and the vendor actually are getting that capability delivered. That's it.
Thank you. Well, Bridget, Christina, and Julie, thank you so much for the discussion today and sharing your expertise. I know it was a great value for the audience, and I know I've learned something. And I want to thank all of you for attending in the audience. Upon exiting, please hit the like button below the video window and share the archive if you found what you saw today of value. Also, you can subscribe to our own YouTube channel by clicking the SCI seal in the lower right corner of the video window. Our next webcast will be on April 8th, and the topic will be Tools for Building an AI-enabled SOC. Registration information is on our website and will also be emailed. Thanks again for attending. If you have any questions about today's event, please send those to info@sci.cmu.edu. Thanks again, all.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.